Have you ever wondered if the dust of Eden still lies beneath your feet? If the ark is hidden in a mountain shadow? If angels once descended on a rocky path, still walked by shepherds and soldiers? What if the lands of the Bible are not lost, but waiting to speak again? And what if every stone, every ruin, every silent wall was telling a story you were always meant to hear? Because once you trace these ancient places, you may not just find history, you may find God. Eden's forgotten gate, in the land once called Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates still wind through scorched valleys, interwoven with the skeletons of forgotten empires, and beneath skies that have seen the rise and fall of kings, there remains a silence too ancient to name. Underneath the dust and cracked clay, many believe that humanity's first breath still echoes, faint but stubborn, destined to be buried by time. Here, in this cradle of civilization, in the land of southern Iraq, the story begins not just with life, but with a garden, the Garden of Eden, a place not only beautiful, but sacred. The Bible never tells us that it was destroyed, only that it was closed, a garden planted by God Himself, east of the Garden of Eden, where a river flows through and divides into 4 branches: the Pishon, the Gihon, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. 2 of these still flow. The other 2 have disappeared, as if swallowed by history. Some believe the Pishon may be the Wadi al-Batin, a dry riverbed now visible only in satellite imagery. Others trace the Gihon to Ethiopia, or the Nile, or to the lost tributaries that once watered the eastern deserts. But perhaps, as some suggest, geography was never the issue. Presence was, for Eden was more than a place. It was communication. It was a place where man walked with God without fear, where shame had no language, where no temple was needed because God was there. But Eden had a gate, and after the fall, that gate was sealed. Genesis speaks of guardians, ablaze with fire, standing at the entrance, to punish, but to protect. The tree of life remained behind, guarded, not erased, not lost, just hidden. Many sought it, explorers with maps, kings with armies, theologians with texts, but like a memory, faded by sadness, Eden slipped away from those who sought it with their eyes. In southern Iraq, near the ancient ruins of Eriduan, of the world's earliest known cities, archaeologists have discovered the foundations of temples and steps once dedicated to the gods. The Sumerians called Eridu the first city where heaven touched earth. It echoes the rhythms of creation too closely to ignore. The beginning, the river, the divine presence, a Babylonian tablet, now housed in the British Museum, speaks of a pure land watered by 4 rivers, a sacred tree at its center, and luminous beings guarding its threshold. It's not biblical, but it does remember something, as if even pagans can't forget what we once lost. In 2007, satellites scanning the Arabian desert found long-buried riverbeds stretching toward the Persian Gulf. Just where Genesis points out, these rivers have been gone from the surface for millennia, but not from the depths. Even science, it seems, has touched the holy ground. So maybe Eden isn't gone. Maybe it's waiting, not in myth, but in promise. The prophet Isaiah wrote that God would comfort Zion, that He would turn her wilderness into Eden, her desert into the garden of God. That is not nostalgia. It is restoration, because the final chapters of the Bible speak not of an end, but of a return, a new Eden, a garden city, where the tree of life stands once more, and the river of God flows unceasingly. The first Eden was lost through disobedience. The final Eden will be opened by grace, and between those two gardens sown hidden by fire, the other descending from the sky history unfolds. A gate once closed, but not forever. 2. Ararat, the mountain that keeps the promise. In the silence after the flood, there was no thunder, no screaming, no crying, just water and a ship drifting alone on the face of the deep. Then, one day, a shock, not violent, but finally, the ship stopped. Genesis 8-4 records that moment with quiet authority. And the ship came to rest in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon Mount Ararat. Not a mountains, a range, a region, a mystery. Today, Mount Ararat rises above Turkey's eastern border, covered with ice, shrouded in clouds. It is the highest peak in the region, great, awesome, and utterly silent. And, for centuries, pilgrims and explorers have turned the mountainside, believing that here, the world began again. The Bible does not describe the final shape or condition of the ark after it landed. It does not say whether it remained intact or rotted in the ground. But throughout Jewish and Christian tradition, Ararat has come to symbolize God's faithfulness, a place of rest after judgment, the pinnacle of hope. Even the name Ararat may recall the ancient kingdom of Urartu, which dominated the region in the 9th century BC. Inscriptions on it speak of mountains, storms, and God's favor. Some Armenian traditions say that Noah planted vines at the foot of Ararat and that his descendants built cities nearby. But Ararat does not speak. It waits. In 1876, a man named James Bryce, a British statesman and mountaineer, claimed to have found a piece of hand-hewn wood near the summit. Others, including a Russian expedition in 1916, reported seeing a ship-like structure buried in the ice, but the evidence was lost, covered up, or extinguished. In 1955, Fernand Navarra, a French explorer, returned with a dark piece of wood from an altitude of 13,000 feet. Laboratory tests found that it was very ancient, possibly thousands of years old, but its origin could not be proven. Skeptics dismissed it. Believers held firm. Satellite scans, aerial footage, even military reports add to the legend. Dark shapes beneath the glacier, cavities beneath the snow, but every expedition has been halted by politics, weather, or fate, as if the mountain itself refuses to reveal its secrets. In 2010, a team of Chinese and Turkish explorers claimed to have entered a large wooden structure on the mountainside, chambers, beams, and floorboards preserved by ice, but they have disputed its authenticity. No peer-reviewed evidence has followed. Once again, silence has returned. That silence, however, is not empty, because what Ararat holds, whether wood, stone, or mere memory, is more than a relic. That is the question. Will judgment ever end with mercy? The flood was more than destruction. It was a reset, a baptism for the world, and Ararat was its altar. The ark's resting place was important not because of its wood, but because God guided it. In the midst of raging waters, there was direction. In the midst of destruction, there was rest. And from that mountain, Noah stepped out into a new world. He built an altar. He offered sacrifices, and God responded not with thunder, but with an oath. I will never again curse the ground because of man. I have set my bow in the clouds. Genesis 9:13. That rainbow began in Ararat. Today, Mount Ararat lies behind closed borders that do not allow easy access. It is guarded by geopolitical tensions claimed by Turkey, denied by Armenia, long watched by Russia and Iran, a mountain surrounded by division, crowned by peace. You cannot climb it easily. You cannot touch the summit without permission, but you can still look, and when you do, you are not looking at a myth. You are looking at a reminder that even after judgment, God still gives a mountain. God gives a promise. God gives a place to start again. 3. The towering silence of Babel. It was not made for worship. It was made for reaching. A tower built not to glorify God, but to replace him, a monument to human ambition, forged in brick and fire, rises from the plain of Shinar. Genesis 11 records it with restrained horror. Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the sky. Let us make ourselves famous. No altars, no offerings, no recognition of the Creator, just height, just pride. The Tower of Babel was humanity's first mass rebellion. After the flood, they were told to fill the earth. Instead, they gathered, they built, they took the heavens, and God came. The Bible doesn't say that he destroyed the tower. It only says that he confused their language and scattered them over the face of the earth, a divina disruption. The first division, from one language, many languages, from one city, nations. Today, the Shinar Plain lies in modern Iraq, near the ruins of ancient Babylon, a city that once had gardens, temples, and the towering Etemenanki ziggurat. Archaeologists believe that this may have been the historical inspiration for the Tower of Babel. Its name means Temple of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. It was about 300 feet tall, a monumental structure for its time. A series of square platforms, stacked like steps to the sky, dedicated to Marduk, the chief god of Babylon. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, described a massive structure with a sanctuary at the top, accessible only to priests. But now, it's gone. All that remains is rubble, fire-baked mud bricks, cracked with age. The foundations that once held up the sky are now filled with dust and wind. In 1913, German archaeologists excavated the base of the ziggurat. They found inscriptions, burned layers, and crumbling stones. One wedge-shaped stela reed. The building of this tower offended the gods. They scattered the people. Not biblical, but hauntingly familiar. Today, the site is eerily quiet. In 1985, Saddam Hussein attempted to rebuild parts of Babylon as a symbol of his power, even carving his name into the new bricks, just as Nebuchadnezzar had done. But the tower was never rebuilt. Babel remained destroyed. Why? Because it was never about height. It was about the heart. God was not intimidated by a structure. He was grieved by its purpose, a humanity that had rejected his need. The tower was not built in hope. It was built in defiance. And so he scattered them, not to punish, but to preserve, to slow their fall, to buy time, to solve diversity, to introduce the need for translation, dialogue, understanding, and from that dispersion, the world as we know it emerged. Tribes, languages, nations, yet the desire to climb remains. From Babel to Babylon, from Babylon to empires, from ziggurats to skyscrapers. We still build, still reach, still forget, but God remembers. At Pentecost, in the book of Acts, something extraordinary happened. Each one heard them speaking in his own language. 18? That was not the reversal of Babel. It was its redemption. Babel scattered the nations. Pentecost brought the nations to God, and so the tower fell silent. but not forgotten. Its ruins lie deep in the earth, a warning etched in clay. You cannot build your way to heaven, but heaven can come down to you. For Abraham's home, long before he became the father of nations, he was just a manot, known as Abraham, but as Abram, son of Terah. And before the journey, before the covenant, before the promise of countless stars, he had a home, The Bible says it simply, and Terah took Abram his son, and they went out from Ur of the Chaldees. Genesis 11:31. Ur of the Chaldees, an ancient city buried in the deep south of Mesopotamia, near the Euphrates River, in what is now southern Iraq. Its name echoes in Genesis as a closed or a door that God told Abram to stay away from. But what was Ur? It was not a village. It was not primitive. It was mighty. Ur was a thriving Sumerian metropolis, one of the most advanced cities of the 3rd millennium BC. It had cobblestone streets, multi-story houses, a library, and a code of laws. Its economy was fueled by trade, agriculture, and religion, and at its center was a towering ziggurat-step temple dedicated to the moon god Nana. The ruins of this ziggurat still stand today, partly restored, its baked bricks inscribed with royal inscriptions. Even now, under the Iraqi sun, the temple casts a long, silent shadow. In 1922, Sir Leonard Woolley led an excavation at Ur that stunned the Western world. Beneath layers of sand, he discovered royal tombs filled with treasure, golden daggers, lapis, lazuli encrusted lutes, exquisite jewelry buried with queens and priests. Ur was no myth. It was real, and it was rich. But amid the glory, there was darkness. The people of Ur were devout, but their gods were many. Idols were in every home. Human sacrifice was not uncommon. And in the midst of this complexity, God called a man, not a priest, not a king, just a man. Leave your country, your people, and your father's house, and go to the land I will show you. Genesis 12:1. It was a call to leave the known, the rich, the safe, to step into the wilderness, guided by a voice, not a map. Perhaps Abram knew the price. Ur was not just home, it was culture, heritage, prestige. Even the soil beneath his feet was steeped in tradition. The ziggurat existed not just in architecture, but in the collective soul of the city. And yet, he went for a promise he could not see, for a land he could not name, for a future he could not explain. The journey of faith, the journey of the Bible itself, began with the departure from Ur. Today, the ruins of Ur lie near the city of Nasiriyah, in a remote and restricted area. Few people visit. Fewer still walk the ancient streets of the city. But the ziggurat still stands worn, wind-blown, but steadfast. In 2021, Pope Francis visited the site. Standing near the base of the tower, in a land torn by war and politics, he prayed for peace and unity, calling Ur the birthplace of monotheism. It was a moment where history, faith, and prophecy collided in the dust. Ur is more than just a pile of rubble. It is a reminder that God does not always call those who qualify. Sometimes he qualifies those who are called, that the journey of redemption begins not with a miracle, but with a step. And though Ur remains a relic of the past, its significance is eternal, because when a man leaves the city of the gods, he becomes a friend of the one true God. Sinai, where God speaks in fire, it shakes the earth, it splits the sky, and for the first time since Eden, God's voice resonates not in the hearts of one person, but in the hearts of an entire nation, they had been slaves. Now they were free, and they stood, trembling at the foot of a smoking mountain, Mount Sinai. The book of Exodus recounts with awe and fear. There was thunder and lightning, and a thick cloud over the mountain, and the whole mountain shook violently. Exodus 19, 16, 18. This is not mythology. This is a moment carved into the identity of a people. The God who had delivered them from Egypt now came down in fire to seal the covenant. But where exactly did this happen? The Bible offers only a hint. Mount Sinai is located in the wilderness, near the Paran Desert. It is a mountain that can be reached in a weeks-long journey from Egypt, surrounded by desolation. For centuries, the traditional location has been Jebel Musa, in the southern Sinai Peninsula. Now in Egypt, at the foot of the mountain, is St. Catherine's Monastery, one of the oldest Christian monasteries in the world, a fortress of stone and silence. Pilgrims have climbed Jebel Musa for centuries. They climb at night to reach the summit at dawn, where the wind cuts through the rock and prayers rise like smoke. But some scholars have challenged this location. Others suggest Jebel al-Lawz, across the Gulf of Aqaba in northwestern Saudi Arabia, citing local tradition. Cracked rocks resembling the rock that Moses struck, and scorched peaks that look like they were burned. Satellite imagery, forbidden archaeology, and political silence only deepen the mystery. Is it there? Is it here? Or both? Because Sinai is more than geography. It is encounter, and the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and stay there." Exodus 24:2. This is where law meets love, where fire does not consume but is revealed, where God, holy and inaccessible, invites people to draw near through reconciliation, through covenant, through blood. The 10 Commandments were not written in heaven. They were carved in stone. That act alone was revolutionary. In the ancient world, gods did not give laws to everyone. Kings claimed divine authority, but gods rarely spoke. Here, however, the God of Israel spoke not just to Moses, but through him, to everyone. A covenant with a nation, not an elite. An ethic based not on empire, but on character. Today, the debate about Mount Sinai is really raging in academia and on YouTube channels. Expeditions are made, borders are crossed, ancient altars are speculated, but perhaps the location is secondary, because Sinai does not make the event sacred. The event makes Sinai sacred. The mountain shook, but the people themselves changed. And from that moment on, the mountain became a symbola, spiritual summit. In the New Testament, Paul contrasts Sinai with Zion. One is law, the other is grace, yet both are mountains of encounter. For even now, the path of faith is still arduous, still shaking, still lit by fire. So whether Mount Sinai is actually in Egypt or Arabia, its echoes reverberate through time. A fire still burns, a voice still rings out, and the covenant once engraved on stone is now engraved on hearts. SIX, the ruined walls of Jericho. Before the sword was drawn, before the trumpet sounded, before the footfalls beat rhythmically around the gates, Jericho stood as an impenetrable city, massive stone walls, strong gates, towers that reached the sky. To the wandering Israelites, it was impossible, but it was also the first step toward the promise, "Behold, I have delivered Jericho into your hands." Joshua 6:2. God did not ask them to fight. He asked them to obey. Walk around the city once every 6 days. On the 7th day, walk 7 times. Then shout. Then observe. It sounds silly, a military nonsense. But obedience is never measured by logic, is measured by faith. And on the seventh day, the walls fell, not weakened, not diminished, fallen. Jericho became the first to conquer Canaan, a sign that God was with his people, that the land he promised was now being given, city by city, battle by battle. But Jericho is not a myth. It is real, located in the modern West Bank, near the Jordan River. Tel Es Sultan is an ancient mound believed to be the biblical Jericho. It is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, with centuries of habitation, destruction, and rebuilding. Excavations began in the 1800s. But it wasn't until the 1930s and 1950s that archaeologists made an extraordinary discovery: collapsed walls, layers of burning, jars full of grain left behind as if the city had collapsed suddenly, not from siege or starvation. British archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon initially concluded that the destruction did not fit Joshua's time, but later scholars, including Bryant Wood, re-examined the data and proposed a different date tone that more closely matched the biblical account. The debate continues. What isn't debated? Jericho was once surrounded by walls that no longer stand. Its name means fragrance, in Hebrew perhaps referring to the sweetness of faith overcoming fear. God's commandments about Jericho, however, were stern. The city would be destroyed, every living thing, every treasure, except what was set aside for God, except Rahab, a woman, a prostituta, a traitor to her people, but loyal to God's messengers. She hid spies. She believed that their God was real, and because of her faith, her family was saved. By faith, Rahab was not destroyed with those who disobeyed. Hebrews 1 Isra, Shaloshim, V'achat. Even in judgment, there is mercy. Even in rounds, there is redemption. Today, the ruins of Jericho remain under Palestinian control, overshadowed by political tension and restricted access, but they still exist, a silent testament to an ancient truth. Faith tears down walls, not just in cities, in hearts. In history, God's power is not bound by physics. His plans do not yield to gravity or logic. He speaks, and walls crumble. He commands, and kingdoms shake. And so Jericho speaks, without a stone, without a sound. It says, "Your walls are not so strong. Your battles are not so great." If God has spoken, then victory is decided. 7. Jerusalem, the city that was, is, and will be. There is no city on earth like Jerusalem. It is not the tallest, the largest, or the richest. Yet for thousands of years, empires have risen and fallen on its stones. Prophets have wept over it. Kings have ruled from it. Saviors have died outside its gates. And it still stands, Jerusalem, the city of the great king. Psalm 48, Shtaim. The first time it appears in the Bible, it is a mystery. A city called Salem, ruled by a priest-king named Melchizedek, who blessed Abram and disappeared from the pages of history, but not from prophecy. By the time of King David, Jerusalem had become the center of God's ongoing plan. He conquered it from the Jebusites and made it his capital. And on its hill, he dreamed of building a house for God. It was his son, Solomon, who realized the dream. The first temple rose from Mount Moriah, crafted of stone, gold, and cedar, a place for sacrifice, a dwelling place for presence. It was here that heaven touched earth. Smoke rose with prayers, and priests walked barefoot on holy ground. But the story of Jerusalem is not a straight line. It is a cycle of glory and destruction, of faith and failure. The Babylonians came, The temple burned. The people were exiled, but they returned. Under Ezra and Nehemiah, the city was rebuilt. The second temple was erected, and by the time of Jesus, it had become a symbol of both religious pride and imperial tension. It was in this Jerusalem that Jesus rode on a donkey. It was here that he wept over the blindness of the city. It was here that he was tried, condemned, crucified, and here he rose again. He is not here. He has been raised, just as he said. Matthew Sarim Vishmuna, Shesh. From that time on, Jerusalem was not just a city but a battleground for kingdoms. The Romans destroyed the temple in 70 AD. The Byzantines built churches. The Muslims built mosques. The Crusaders and the Caliphs waged war. The Jews returned, scattered, and returned again. Today, Jerusalem is a divided city, a place of tension, a place of longing. At its center is the western wall that remains of Herod's second temple. Jews come to pray, pressing folded prayers into its cracks, weeping for what is lost, hoping for what will be restored. Just above it is the Dome of the Raqqa site, sacred to Islam, built on the very mountain where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac, and where the temple once stood. And nearby, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre claims to be the site of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. 3 faiths, 1 city, and a tension that has never ended. But the Bible speaks of another Jerusalem. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. Revelation 21:2. A city not built by human hands, not ruled by kings, not divided by war, a city where God dwells with his people, where every tear is wiped away, where there is no temple for God himself is the temple. This is the promised Jerusalem. This is the Jerusalem that is to come. So when you walk the ancient streets of this city today, when you touch the stones, when you gaze at the Mount of Olives or climb Mount Zion, you are not just walking through history. You are walking through prophecy. Jerusalem is the only city on earth where the past, the present, and the future all breathe the same air. The city has fallen. The city has risen. The city will rise again. 8. Bethlehem, humble beginnings. It's easy to miss. A small town, tucked away in the hills of Judah. Stone houses, winding alleys, sheep pastures stretching to olive groves. Yet, from this quiet place, eternity has entered time. But you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel. Micah, Lima, Dua, Bethlehem. Its name means house of bread. And fitting, for one day those born here will say, I am the bread of life. End of 2. But centuries before Christ was born, Bethlehem itself wove the tapestry of redemption. It was here that Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, died in childbirth. Her tomb still stands at the edge of town, a place of mourning and remembrance. This is where Ruth, the Moabite widow, gleaned in Boaz's field sand, became David's great-grandmother. This is where David was born, a shepherd boy who became king, anointed in darkness, remembered in glory. And it was from his lineage, from this town, that the Messiah would come. When the time came, the world paid no attention. No trumpets, no king, just a census, a journey, a crowded inn, and then a stable, among a cry that tore through the night. Luke tells us clearly, she gave birth to her firstborn, Eson. She wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Luke 2-7. Heaven did not descend to Rome or Alexandria or Athens. It came to Bethlehem with dirt, with straw, with sweat and tears. Angels sang in the sky, above the fields where shepherds kept watch. The lowest class of society received the highest news, and from the east, wise men followed a star not to a palace, but to a house in Bethlehem, where they bowed to a child, not a warrior, not a scholar, a child. Today, the Church of the Nativity marks the spot where Christ is believed to have been born, built over a cave. Its entrance is small, so small that all who enter must bow, whether emperor or pilgrim. One must bow to approach the King, who first bows before us. And on the surrounding hills, the shepherds' caves still stand, quiet, cold, holy. Bethlehem is not a city of grandeur. It is a city of beginnings, of promises whispered before kings ascend the throne, of mercy growing in silence, of God coming not with armies, but with a mother's cry. And he still comes in small ways, in waiting, in willingness, because Bethlehem is not just a place, it is a pattern. God meets us not in our strength, but in our need, not in glory, but in humility. And from the house of bread, he gave the world a savior. Nazareth, the hidden years. Can anything good come from it? That was the question, sarcastically contemptuous, that Nathanael uttered when he first heard the name Nazareth. Can anything good come from Nazareth? John 1:46. This was not said cruelly. It was said intimately, because Nazareth, in Jesus' time, was a forgotten village, small, poor, and unimpressive. No prophets had come from there. No kings had ever walked its streets. It is not even mentioned in the Old Testament, and yet God chose it. God always chooses the unexpected, nestled among the hills of Galilee. Nazareth was not along any major trade route. It had no fortress, no temple, no reputation. Archaeologists estimate its first-century population at 200, 400, a few dozen houses, partly carved into caves, clustered near a spring, and in that obscurity, the Word became flesh. Luke tells us that Gabriel, the archangel, was sent to a virgin betrothed to a man named Joseph. The virgin's name was Mary. Luke 1:27. And the angel said, "You will conceive and bear a son, and you will call his name Jesus." It began in Nazareth, not Bethlehem, not Jerusalem, in a house, in a girl, in a whisper. And from that moment on, Nazareth held a secret for 30 years. Jesus lived there, not performing miracles, not preaching, just living. He walked its dusty streets. He worked with Joseph as a carpenter, or, perhaps more accurately, a tectona builder of wood and stone. He knew the smell of freshly cut wood and burnt bread. He prayed in its synagogue. He celebrated its festivals. He mourned its funerals. The Son of God grew up in a place so ordinary that most people never noticed it. And perhaps that was the point. Nazareth was a place of preparation, a place of silence before the voice echoed across Galilee, a place of obedience before the cross was carried to Jerusalem, a place of humanity before divinity was revealed. When he returned to preach in his hometown, they did not welcome him as a prophet. They tried to push him off a cliff. A prophet is not without honor, except in his own country. Mark Shish Audaba. Even today, Nazareth remains quiet. It is a melting pot of Christian and Muslim families, a city steeped in centuries of tradition. The Basilica of the Annunciation is a monument to Mary's, yes? Beneath it are what many believe to be the ruins of her childhood home. Pilgrims visit in silence. They touch stones, they whisper prayers, but the town itself still resonates with the same humility it had 2,000 years ago. Nazareth reminds us that God's greatest works are often hidden, not in palaces, not in movements, but in formed quietly in the shadows. The Messiah was not created in a moment. He was formed in the silence of Nazareth. So when God seems silent in your life, when the years pass and glory seems distant, remember Nazareth, because even silence can be sacred. 10. Golgotha and the Garden Tomb. Outside the city walls, just beyond the north gate of Jerusalem, there is a hill, barren, rugged, shaped like a skull. Golgotha, the place of the skull. This is where Roman soldiers led the bloody, beaten body of Jesus of Nazareth. This is where they drove irons through flesh and bone. This is where the Lamb of God was lifted up for all to see. When they came to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him. Luke 23:33. Golgotha was not a cathedral. It was not a temple. It was a public execution site, chosen for its visibility, a place of shame, cruelty, and death, and yet it became the holiest place on earth. Here, the wrath of God and the mercy of God collided. Here, the curse of sin was broken by the obedience of one man. Here, blood touched the ground, and everything changed. The Gospels tell us that near the place of the crucifixion, there was a garden, and in that garden a tomb. Now, in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb, in which no one had yet been laid. John 9:41. It belonged to Joseph of Arimathea, a secret disciple. He offered it, not knowing that it would only be borrowed, because on the third day, the stone was rolled away. The tomb was empty. Death had lost its grip. The garden Tombos, many now call Idis, one of the two main sites that Christians believe to be the burial and resurrection of Jesus, set in a peaceful garden just outside the old city of Jerusalem. It contrasts with the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the traditional site confirmed by Constantine's mother in the 4th century. Both sites are sacred. Both are steeped in centuries of prayer. But only one thing matters. He is not there. Thousands of people visit the garden sepulchre each year. They see the ancient winepress, the groove for the rolling stone, the burial chamber carved into the limestone. They enter, they kneel, they weep, and they hear the silent testimony carved near the door. He is not here. He has risen. And the power of Golgotha is not just that Jesus died, it is that he died there publicly, in shame, in pain, for us. And the glory of the garden is not just that it contained his body, it is that it could not contain him for long. From Golgotha, we learn that no sin is too great. From the garden tomb, we learn that no grave is too final. And just as Eden began in a garden, so too does redemption. A new Adam, a new covenant, a new beginning. Today, the stones still stand, the hill still looms, the tomb still opens its mouth in silence. But that silence speaks louder than 1,000 sermons. He is risen. He is not forgotten. He will come again, and until that day, Golgotha and the garden stand side by side, one a place of death, the other a gate of life. We have walked where prophets once stood, where kings were crowned and crucified, where angels descended, and where God's voice shook the earth. From Eden's hidden gate to the garden tomb's open door, the places of the Bible are more than coordinates on a map. They are thresholds between heaven and earth, between memory and mystery, between what was and what will be. Some are buried beneath sand, some lie crumbled under centuries of silence. Some pulse with the footsteps of pilgrims, others with the boots of soldiers, but of every stone, every valley, every hill still speaks. They speak of promises made and promises kept, of judgment that fell and grace that rose, of a God who enters history not as myth, not as metaphor, but as presence. We began in a garden, we ended in a garden, and between them flowed blood, fire, covenant, exile, and return. The world has changed. Kingdoms have fallen. Empires have vanished. But these places remain, and perhaps they remain for you to walk, to wonder, to remember. Because if Eden is real, and Sinai once shook, if Jericho crumbled and Ararat held firm, if Golgotha bled and the tomb was empty, then maybe, just maybe, this story is not ancient, it is alive. And maybe, the next time you touch the earth, you will listen a little more closely, because the stones beneath your feet, they may remember